So Russell Denman and myself, Eleanor Goulding, are collaborative artists, and we're based in Sherborne in Dorset, and we work together mainly on public commissions at the moment. And so we're working on three quite fairly big projects at the moment, and it's not how we started our practice. We started making commercial work in design and moved into public art more recently. So yeah, that's where we are now.
Right. So the three pieces of the three public art projects you just mentioned there, so are they the kind of first ones that you've started to work on?
Yeah, they're the first ones that we've worked on. We had a commercial practice designing and making. So we designed and made a collection of furniture that we sold the design for that range. So we had Russell's background was in cabinet making, so he's a trained cabinet maker as well as his art practice. Yeah. So we had that commercial experience in realizing the project, yeah, and working as part of a wider team with different collaborators and that in that industry really. So that was how we moved into public art from there.
Was that quite a conscious decision for you both? That was something you were interested in doing, or did it sort of just kind of...
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, we had that period, which is quite an exciting period, the designing and making and manufacturing, but that was also very much to support our work as artists. So we wanted to be making our own work and following our own interests. Yeah. But we had to follow that practice so that we could support ourselves in our studio. What ended up happening was that we made a body of work together for a joint exhibition, which was a bit of a leap of faith really, because we had to stop our commercial work, which meant earning the money to, and actually sort of taking a bit of a leap into following our own interests. And from that we saw some, I can't remember how we found an open call or got introduced to Alex at A Space Arts in Southampton. Yeah. And the work from that joint exhibition was quite well aligned with a commission that they had an open call for at the time. So the work kind of really fit. Okay. Yeah. But at the time, so we did submit a proposal for that particular public art project, but I don't think it was a very good proposal, even though the work was quite well aligned. We hadn't had that kind of experience. So yeah, so we look back on that now and kind of cringe at that proposal, because it was really kind of clumsy, and but it was just something that we felt like we would be really well suited to with our combination of skills and our interests at the time. Yeah.
And the three, could you maybe talk about a little bit about each of those public art projects that you're doing at the moment in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So the first public art commission that we won or were selected for is in Cumberland Place in Southampton, and it's a courtyard concept. So it's a really big project. It's our largest project to date, and it's making a courtyard as part of a new student accommodation development. So we're casting a floor piece which is 70 square meters. So it's very big, and it's very different to things we've done before, although we have done some casting before. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely it's put us sort of out of our comfort zone, which has been really interesting, because that's where we've developed a lot of learning and pushed into new ways of working. So that's all cast concrete, with using colour as well, so mixing our own colour pigments, and we decided to cast all of that in-house ourselves. So we worked together with a collaborator making the molds for the cast. So we've commissioned molds, and then we're doing all the casting ourselves. So yeah, it's a really interesting project which we'll be installing in September this year.
Okay.
And then another one is Winterbourne Abbas, which is a new development here in Dorset in the area of natural outstanding beauty. There's a housing development that have commissioned a series of wildlife pods. So we looked at the site and really wanted to add an element for wildlife. So we proposed 6 wildlife pods based on the poppy seed forms of the wildflowers found on the site.
Yeah.
So yeah, we proposed we did some watercolor drawings and sketches of how they might look, and yeah, so that one's carved oak, so very different to so it's working with wood, which is Russell's kind of training and comfort zone. So that's that one. And then another one we're working on is with Dorset Council here in Dorset, which is a new sculpture trail in Weymouth, which is a project about water and putting in new free water refill points all across the town. And there'll be a sculpture trail that marks the points of all the refill units. So it's about getting rid of single-use plastics, and our work will be street furniture that responds to the themes and is somewhere where people can meet and sit and be together and fill up their water bottles. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that so you said the floor piece was going to be installed in September, and then there's the pods or the wildlife pods, are they already in place, or are they still
No, they're going to be installed in the next 2 weeks. So we're just coming to the end of that project now, which is a project that we've really loved and has sort of fitted in lots of different ways, not just, you know, from lots of different ways that it's worked from a making perspective, but also financially it's viable, you know. It's worked, and I think for what we intended to do to support wildlife and that community, not just a human community, supporting a living community, I think and the response so far has been really lovely to the pods. Oh, that's one behind us there. So that'll be put on a stem pole, and there'll be a hole bored in for birds to nest inside. So I think it's kind of been a project that has appealed to lots of different people and has been really sort of unifying. So it's really interesting to hear what people think about things, and it's really nice when there's something that appeals to lots of different types of people. So yeah, it's been a good one.
And the kind of feeling is that you're very drawn to the natural materials, whether that's obviously wood or the kind of processes. I'm very much guessing that that's very particular, and is that because of Russell's kind of skill set? Because I was kind of reading on your website about the kind of division between how you work collaboratively, that and the kind of materials and techniques, and yourself kind of themes and kind of concepts, and that's how the kind of marriage sort of happens in the studio. But
I mean, we both have really different approaches to our work, which is how it works, I think, because we always have really different perspectives, and that's really useful when coming up with ideas or trying to think about things in a different way, and to have those different perspectives. So Russell definitely has lots of focus on materials and techniques, and is very specific and particular about his way of working, and I'm much broader in terms of the ideas and concepts, I suppose, and then he's much more cautious as well. So I think we sort of balance each other quite well in that way. But we're both makers, but I think his focus really is wood and techniques and materials. So
I was talking to one of the other artists I was interviewing. They were particularly saying that they kind of wish that they worked collaboratively in some ways, because particularly when you're working in public space, there's a kind of whole sort of other level of risk and kind of that you kind of have to take in some ways. And I think sharing that kind of process with somebody must be actually really nice to
having that to share, so sharing that load in a way,
the exposure of you know, putting your practice and yourself into that kind of situation, I think is sort of, that's what's different about not working in a gallery, you know, you sort of
it's definitely nice to have each other to sort of go back to and sort of go through things and sort of take that risk with somebody else as well, because it's quite a lot of risk that you take when you sort of when we've put forward these ideas and thought of how we're going to make them, and to sort of, but we work with other people as well, so we have worked collaboratively with a mold maker in Southampton, so that, you know, and that was a big design process that we went through with them on the best way to make molds, and and then we work with a colleague on drafting as well, like a computer draftsman, so he'll help us draw up the plans in CAD, and so, and that's another input then, which is really helpful. So
and I think I often through projects I've worked on is that you end up going back to work with the same people as well. You kind of build that trust and kind of
that trust
network and sort of the skills of people, and I think again it's sort of something quite particular about working in public space perhaps in that way, and I think that's
it's a really interesting way of working in public space, because you can't, you have the integrity of your idea, but then you can't just go and necessarily place a piece of work in a place and expect it to work. It kind of you work with lots of inputs and limitations, so it's interesting to put all those together, and it's sort of like a puzzle that you can think, what am I working with here, what components have I got, because you've got the interest of the public and the interest of the commissioner, then the interest of the developer, and then your integrity as an artist to consider. So it's kind of, I like that way of working, because it kind of, I like the restrictions in a way, and kind of coming up with a solution, and so it's been we've really enjoyed it.
I think and having A Space sort of acting as the producer in a way, that kind of the role of the producer I think is quite particular and important, because you have those stakeholders, and you have, you know, I kind of see that's about my background, so, you know, I sort of often feel like it's my place to kind of ensure that the artist has that space to kind of, you know, have the time and kind of concentration on the work, and that they can do what they need to do there with the negotiations that are happening. But it's quite I think otherwise it can become quite difficult as well, and like you say, the kind of negotiation with the community and kind of stakeholders, and
it's really useful, and it's really important to have that producer there, like you said, like A Space have just been fantastic, because they're a sounding board, but they also will go between and just let us just make it and get on with it, and
exactly. I think otherwise you risk then of the work suffering, and if you don't have that kind of processes in place, which
and having that trust in us as well to
has that, and do you think that's then played a part in terms of, because obviously you're developing 2 of those commissions with them, did they happen at slightly separate time frames? And
well, one of them got really delayed for various reasons, so they've ended up really overlapping, which wasn't always the plan, but that's just how it's ended up working. And so we've had meetings about one, and then we go, right, now we need to talk about this one, and sort of you know, just kind of they're both so different and need such different they just need very different approaches, so it's been really good to have A Space there, and and work with them.
How have you felt in terms of the time frames of producing, because they're permanent works, aren't they? So I think quite often in other works that I have done, there's a kind of slight frustration there in terms of time frames and
yeah.
There's still work to be done with the local authorities, particularly over time frames and public artworks, and particularly allowing that kind of lengthy sort of research and kind of time to allow ideas to kind of come through and develop and change and have enough time for that process to take place properly. It
goes through lots of different stages. So with Southampton, there was a really big research time and time for that development of the ideas. Like we really put a lot of work into that time, probably more than we have done for other things, because it was our first big proposal, and it took a lot of research and a lot of thought, and way more than we've done probably since or before. So that time was kind of really precious in a way, and then it moves into a different phase of when we were commissioned to the research that goes into that's a very different place of the research into nuts and bolts and physicalities of making and lots of practicalities, and then planning permission, and then it's all very, very different from that initial stage. So I think it, and then with Winterbourne Abbess and the wildlife pods, our ideal for that would have been a much longer time frame for making, because we're working with natural materials that need to dry out naturally and season, and we were really we were lucky that we got some very dry timber for that had been drying for a really long time, but that's not always the case. So I think obviously artists want maximum time for developing and making work, because it's how you get the best, most thought through results. And I think if the formula's all worked out and you're working with things that are very predictable, then time is not so much of an issue. But I guess with working with materials like wood, which is its own thing, which is alive and it moves and it does things that you don't expect. And
I worked, this was quite a few years ago now, but I worked with a couple of artists, Heather and Ivan Morrison, and a pavilion in a park in Bristol, which they designed. It was sort of like all sort of triangular kind of pieces, which then bolted together, but they really wanted the community to put it together, so we barn raised it. It was supposed to go up in 24 hours. And in reality it wasn't quite that, but it did work. But it was, as you said, it's wood and the kind of type of material, and it was they also charred it, so they burnt all the surface of it. So there was it was very interesting. But
I really like their work a lot. They're really interesting artists.
They're great to work with, and their kind of process of working with the community and materials, and kind of their process is sort of really interesting and great to work with. So, but it was quite, we kept having to fix it as well. It was sort of there of course as well. So
the unexpected. I like
unexpected.
It's nice that the community put that together, though. I like that.
It was interesting. To start with, they were really, I think, because Heather and Ivan work a lot with communities, but they are very clear about what they want to make as artists as well. So I think it's kind of balancing that, and it was about, that particular project was about sort of bringing the community on board, but in a way that, so they knew that that Heather and Ivan had a very clear vision about what they wanted to put in that park. So it was sort of getting them on board with that, rather than allowing the community to sort of feel like that they were going to be designing what was going
designing.
It was a fine balance, but it was fine. I mean, there was a lot of people who were worried, and then of course it was there for 6 months, and then we actually had the opposite happen. They were really upset we were taking it down then, and you're like, I was really upset at the start, and then which was lovely, because they'd come round for it, and the community got to use the pavilion for whatever they wanted to for 6 months. So, but it's that sort of, it's not straightforward, is it, in public space? It's sort of winding and adapting and sort of kind of responding to the unexpected, I think. Makes it really interesting, but quite stressful at times sometimes. I think.
I like that, you know, I've liked with every proposal we've done, we've always gone to the place and looked around and sort of thought about what's there, and that often that's quite different to the brief as well, how you imagine it is going to be.
Yeah.
So, you know, really getting a sense for the place and how people are going to use that place, and what is it that we can provide that will enhance or make people sort of look at this space differently, or provide an extra
level. Yeah.
You know, so it's been really interesting to go to those places and really kind of feel like get involved in that particular place. So like in Southampton with the courtyard, we went there and thought, how can we best support the people that are going to live here and study in Southampton, and it just kept coming back to a place where people could meet and be together, have this shared place where they can sit, and a transitional space between where they live and the city. So it had to be a floor piece with seating, and that's when we had that as a component that we knew we wanted to work with. So then it was looking at the history of the place and then putting those pieces together. So I think, but going there and getting a feel for the place and thinking about who's going to use it and how can we sort of support that community is always really interesting.
Yeah, the kind of the pods that you're putting in, are they, is anybody already, is it for a housing development?
Yeah, it's a housing development, but it'll be on the wildflower bank at the back, so it's not actually going to be somewhere people can access. So when we went there, we found that that wasn't clear from the brief, that the area wasn't going to be able to be accessed by people. So we were kind of thinking, well, how can this be used by the community? And then we thought a lot, what was really obvious about the place was the ecology and the wildlife. So we instantly wanted to support that community, and then that's something that can be enjoyed by the people that live there, because they can watch the birds nesting, and so it was really by going there and getting that sense of the place that we came up with that idea.
How's the process and thinking about the piece you're doing for Weymouth? Obviously that's kind of a different local authority, different place to kind of I just wondered, have you kind of seen a difference in their kind of approach or process?
It's very different, because on that project we're working as a group, so we're one of 6 other artists, so it's us and then 5 other artists.
So you're each doing a different
so each will have so it's a trail and it will all connect up, so we're one of the artists on a trail. So, and working with the council's very different to,
there's no kind of is it they're the commissioner and the producer in a way?
So the producer's B-side, so they were it's a partnership between B-side and Weymouth, well, now Dorset Council. So it's just been a very different approach, and they wanted all the work to work together. So we've had lots of conversations with the other artists, and it's a different approach in some ways, and it was much more broad as well, because we were asked to propose work anywhere across the town. So we didn't have we want work sited in this location. It was you tell us where the work should be, and then we'll try and match it all up and fit it together. So we came up with 2 proposals. So one was actually for the South Pier and one was for the town square. So then they could select which one they thought would be the most successful piece of work, and that ended up being the town square.
Quite nice that you were given that freedom, because quite often it is very specific. We want something like there, an artist to kind of have, to sort of to kind of research and kind of have that choice is quite nice to hear.
We really enjoyed that. I think it didn't suit everyone's way of working, but I think I really liked having that freedom and that time to explore, and I think there's lots of different people working on that project, which all have really different approaches. So some people are real crafts people, makers, so they're very used to having a brief and they work to the brief, and then so it's interesting to see how everyone works so differently.
Awesome. Yeah, so it sounds like you sort of got a lot from that process of being able to kind of not collaborate, but sort of that ability to discuss with the other artists and kind of be part of a kind of group like that.
It's been nice to be part of a group, and it just feels very different again. So it's and different commissioners who have different approaches and inputs as well. So the curator on that project is an artist as well, whose work we've discovered since working on that. So we have lots of shared interests, and that's been really nice because we've looked at some shared resource material like the geological maps and colour, and been introduced to lots of interesting things that way. So we've got, I think, and that's the thing about the relationship, is been really key for us to sort of build those relationships with commissioners, and because that's what you have. That's how, like sort of, even when we were before in our commercial work, we sort of realized that the most important things were our relationships with people, and maintaining those and sustaining those and making strong good connections with people, and that's how things have happened for us as well.
Well, I think it does, because I think particularly as we were talking about trust before, I think, we quite often, when I worked with the same people on several different commissions in different sites and spaces and stuff, but because you get to know how an artist works and they know how you work, and there's a kind of shorthand to that, and a trust as well. I think that they talk, your reputation then grows, and then producers talk to each other, and I think that it's that. I think quite often artists feel that, who are not working in this area, or who are perhaps just starting out, that I think your websites and all those kind of other things are really important as well, but I think it's that kind of connection to people and word of mouth. Actually, a lot of my work has come through that as a freelancer since becoming freelancer.
Or kind of thinking, what have you thought about, have you seen this, or somebody's found out and then sent us a message, or and then just kind of share things with each other, and we do that for other people as well. So if I think, that really suits my friend, and I'll send it on. And I think that I mean, when we first moved our studio to Dorset from Brighton, to sort of into our studio now, we started a series of events and workshops, so that and that, because we didn't know anybody here, and we really met a lot of people through that, and I think through building those, I'm not sure I like the word networks, but I sort of building those,
the kind of collective that you sit. I mean, it's a bit like me. The first thing I did when I came to, I'll just have a coffee with Dan, and that was like
that's nice.
I could have done. So that's what I want to. And you kind of have to find where you fit in, and you have to get to know a place and get to know the people there. I think absolutely.
And then people sort of, it's about building those relationships and sort of making those introductions, I guess. Like our first kind of introduction to A Space was with a series of architectural models we were making that did fit quite well with one of their open calls, and that was how we got to know Alex, who works there, and then he would pass things on to us, or that kind of thing. So
I'm just wondering, as you've gone through these kind of three processes with these particular works, I just wondered, are there things that have that you're storing in your mind, that how you might continue to work within public space going forward, the kind of, I suppose, learning points, or just things that I would do that slightly differently, and just in terms of how other artists might, the learning points they could take from what you are, maybe.
I think it's that I sort of really realised that it's about following your own interests, and so going forwards, it's sort of not necessarily finding the next commission straight away, but following through what we're interested in. Like now we're thinking a lot about filmmaking and sort of other ways of working, and then I think things will naturally develop out of that and come. So part of what I'm interested in public art is part of the reason I was involved. I've just curated a film programme here in Dorset, a county-wide film programme, and that has a lot of the same themes, like looking at the threads that knit people together in spaces and bringing people together into a space, and what are these unifying threads that we share. So I think it's a way of, I guess, following those interests in whatever way that is, and then looking to see what fits with that at the time, because if we don't do that, I don't think there'll be real integrity in what we're making. So not necessarily just looking around for the next thing, but hopefully having the space and the time to just settle into our interest and make the work that reflects those values. So that's the position we always want to be in, is that, you know, we support ourselves enough to be able to do that and grow our practice more aligned with our interests and our ideas, so that it's not a separate thing, and that it can, you know, they can cross over and allow space for unexpected things to sort of come into our work as well. I think that was how we felt very restricted in the past, was that there wasn't ever enough space for that. So we're always trying to get to the point where we can allow these things in and work in new ways and with new people. I'm
just looking at my questions. So kind of what advice do you think you would give to artists then that have never worked in this area before and that we're looking to do that?
That's a good question. I think it's to just have integrity in your ideas, so sort of following your own interests and ideas, and then seeing what opportunities might align with that, and building relationships with organizations and people in your local communities, just sort of making those relationships and connections with people, and to keep making work that feels like it's yours. And then I think people will respond to that, and sort of see what could fit with that at the right time, and not trying to force yourself into things that aren't necessarily suited to you because it's a job, or because it's because I think that's not really going to work.
And I sort of asked sort of each artist this, with the understanding that I'm not sure anybody really knows the answer particularly, but
I'm not.
With what's happened with the coronavirus, and I just wondered how you might have been affected as artists through that, but also I'm also just, I mean, it sounds like the works that you are doing at the moment, the public artworks, have not been delayed particularly, and you were saying that you're going to install the pods, and then also install in September the floor piece. So that's interesting to kind of hear, I think. But just out of your own kind of, whether you've been thinking about it, I mean, it's sort of been in my head, sort of on and off, about how you think that might change the kind of way people are working in public space.
It's interesting. I think we're really lucky that we've been able to keep working, although only one of us has been able to work. So things have been much slower than we would have liked. There were 3 of us. Now there's 1 of us working at a time. So, but we're lucky that our work is all outside and it's all in public space, and so it's not really been affected. And in some ways, I think it's kind of more interesting now, more than ever. It's how work will be in these public spaces going forwards. I think it's it's definitely given us more space and time to think about how we want our lives and work to be in the future, and looking at sort of more sustainable ways of doing things, and our approaches to, you know, for example, like we'd like to live and work in the same place and use cars less, and you know, just kind of looking at adapting our practice so that we can achieve the things we're working towards. But yeah, I think, you know, luckily we haven't been affected too much, apart from delays and like, for example, we have 2 studios at the moment for these 2 projects, but we can only really use one at a time, so there's extra costs involved in that way. But you know, none of our work got cancelled, or you know, I know a lot of artists have their work's just dropped off a cliff. So.
I think it's interesting. I think it might be one of the sort of only areas of sort of visual art and sort of design that sort of is able to kind of work through it in some way, because of what you said. You know, it's outdoors. You know, kind of the installation processes and kind of what you're doing, and I'm sure there'll have to be adaptations and stuff, and obviously the sort of element of practice around social engagement, I think, will have a big effect, obviously, on that, and how to do that. I know that I've seen a few residencies recently that are actually trying to kind of look at getting artists to kind of do residencies around how do you do socially engaged practice, but in these socially distanced times. So,
that's really interesting.
And I've sort of been thinking about a possible program recently from our local park where you completely don't, and it's a completely unannounced sort of public program, so that things happen totally unannounced, because then you're not at risk of getting crowds. You know, you can't do crowds of people, so
I like that idea.
Announce, and so that only people who are passing by at that particular moment get sort of in a way. So you'd have to document it well in some way, or like you'd have to think that through in some way. But you know, that could be another possibility, which I quite like, because then you're sort of your audience is then sort of unexpected, and kind of you're not making any predetermined sort of decisions around that to start with. In a way, it's whoever.
It is interesting thinking about these adaptations and sort of how you adapt, and I think that's one thing that artists do really well, is adapt to new situations. And with the film program that we worked on here in Dorset, it was sort of like, you know, there's been lots of talk about drive-in movies, and sort of, you know, how can you sort of go, not all be together in a screening, so how can we work around that? And
I like that idea.
Drive-ins, it sort of seems obvious. And then but the Weymouth project that we're working on with the street furniture, but one of the points from the council has been, perhaps we should consider that they are 2 meters apart, and you know, all these sort of design considerations, and that, and you sort of
permanently sort of
thinking, is this going to be how we actually need to think for a long period of time? Or, you know, I don't, it's hard to imagine how you would consider those in, like, those things really long term, because you always sort of imagine that this will change and this will end. And
or that, you know, it's kind of interesting, I think, on my cycle to the studio, compared to only a few weeks ago, it really does feel like people are like just sort of carrying on far more normally than they were. It's like sort of lots of activity in all the industrial units I have to go past.
I mean, for most of the lockdown, I was casting on my own at the unit that we have, and I was opening up the gates every morning. I was the only one there. You know, it was very eerie, and now it feels like nothing's ever. It feels like it's just back to business as usual, and you do sort of wonder, are people actually are people taking anything from that time, and are they going to make changes? Or I don't know.
Or that we're sort of asked to kind of consider it almost too quickly, in a way that I feel like there needs to be kind of more distance before we can kind of properly reflect on it and consider how you know, because in a way I kind of hope that more kind of concrete stuff will come out of this for kind of the art world and visual art world, that just enables us to be a bit more reflective on things and considerate of things, because I think things are always kind of moving very fast, and
very fast, yeah.
Duration and time is quite interested in, particularly with public artworks, because it's sort of one of my things that, you know, I kind of want to see more projects where the time is built in there, and actually what does the program look like that can happen over 10 years and not squeezed down into kind of, you know, sort of really tight time frames. And
that's really interesting, and things that aren't physical as well, so how you know, I think that's really interesting to think about. But yeah, the time that would be amazing if you could have a really long period of time to realize things, and what would come out of that.
Considering any of the kind of practical considerations, funding or anything. You just have unlimited amounts of money and do this kind of thing. I mean, there has been projects like that, but quite some time ago, when funding landscapes were quite different, or in countries like sort of Holland, where the sort of process of public art and the municipalities are kind of much more able to take a risk, or interested in taking a risk, which is, I think, much local authorities here and developers particularly are very averse. And that would be really nice to see some changes happen there, I think. Yeah,
it would. I think that was what a couple of our proposals were in the final shortlist, and one was nearly selected, but then the council thought it would be a bit too risky, so it would be nice not to have those those worries, or but be able to be a bit more, you know, take more risks. And
I think the only thing there is having that producer or organisation that kind of sits between the kind of council and certain situations. You know, my director there, Claire Doherty, who was very good at kind of enabling that kind of more riskier type of commissioning to happen. The situations would take that risk on, but, you know, the local authorities, I mean, there was a lot of processes, you know, particularly behind some of the works that took a lot of time to kind of enable that to happen, in terms of building up that that sort of relationship with the council, so that we could then enable that more riskier type of work to happen. I think Bristol was a particular place anyway. It's a city that quite often take a risk on things anyway, so context driven, isn't it, in some ways, I think.
I guess it depends on where you're working, and lots of different things.
Absolutely. There was a question I probably should have asked before the coronavirus one, but I was just, some of the, I don't know how much opportunity you've had in the kind of the commissions you've done so far, to kind of the kind of engagement with the kind of community, and how perhaps, you know, as artists, because I also feel quite strongly that not all artists, that's not part of every artist's work or process to engage in a particular type of way. I think quite often these days, briefs for public artworks kind of expect the artist to do socially engaged sort of type work and
practice,
a particular type of practice. So, you know, I don't agree with that particularly, but obviously it's important to have a relationship with the place that the work is going in, but that can kind of manifest in quite a lot of different ways, I think. But I just wondered what your feelings were on that kind of process, and how you might work through that, or that kind of.
I mean, I guess we've done our research on each place and looked at the communities that will be using it, and in that way. But as a direct engagement, we've done workshops. We do workshops with the local school, and we'll be doing a series of workshops with the wildlife pods when they're installed with the local schools as well. So I think I'm interested in working with children, because I just love their energy and their creative sort of input into things, and they're just naturally so creative. So it's really nice to get them involved and inspired in the arts, because it's something that doesn't happen in schools in the curriculum very much, which I find really sad. So, you know, to be able to go in and just say, you know, talk about projects and things that we're doing and ways of working, and just be really free with children. I think that for me, that's the kind of engagement that I want to do, and I don't have much experience of other sort of public engagement, but I've really enjoyed those sessions when we've had the opportunity to do them. And
I think something like that around the pods is kind of really, because it's then you're sort of introducing them, that you're making them known to kind of a wider kind of constituent of people, aren't you? So
and they can design their own, and you know, talk about ecology and talk about birds and why that's important, and then it's bringing in sort of design as well as wildlife and ecology on their curriculum. And you know, our daughter, she worked with us a bit on this project as well when we were thinking about the kids workshops, and she did a lot of drawings, and we really talked a lot about the themes and ecology, and she's still designing insect homes all the time and that kind of thing. So I think just working with children is such a lovely opportunity, and you know, we feel really lucky when we get to do that.
Right.
But that's something we really enjoy and would like to do more of as well. You know, it'd be nice to find a way of doing that with each project, really.
Have you got your eye on anything sort of coming up in the future that you're considering thinking about, or is it sort of on these ones that you're working on now at the moment?
Well, I think Russell's very focused on what he's doing now, and while I've been at home with our daughter during this lockdown period, I've sort of definitely thought about other things and ways of developing what we're doing now. So I think the wildlife pods have been such a lovely project for us, and we've thought of ways of developing those, and there's a few things that we've seen that would be really well suited to that, like working particularly with certain orchards and certain varieties of trees, and looking at sort of the history of place in terms of ancient orchards and placemaking.
One of the artists I've interviewed, the first one for this, might be really interesting for you to talk to. Actually, I could make it, but she's called Anne-Marie Culhane, but she's sort of, all her work is to do with like permaculture and soils and planting orchards and working.
Nice.
So she might be quite an interesting.
That sounds really good. Yeah. And there's a really great organisation that you must know about, Common Ground, that are based really near us in Dorset. So there's lots of overlaps, and I think we just the more, you know, just keeping on reading and sort of thinking about developing our work in particular with wood and ecology at the moment is something that we feel really interested in. So we'll be looking out for things that are connected to that quite closely, and hope, you know, see what comes out of that. But you know, you just need to finish this work first. So it's just
get that done.
Kind of such a balance between actually just making, because things are so time consuming, and you know, and then just to have is a very different sort of hat on to think about the next thing. And
would you consider working kind of sort of having a slightly more hands-off approach? Is that kind of really do you feel that that's something you kind of really want to hang on to as part of your project?
I think it's really important to us that we make our own work, and that's kind of something that we feel really strongly about. That's not to say that if something was big enough that we could work with other people as well, that would be nice, but I think just having that connection to materiality and tools, and having space where you could just put Radio 4 on and sort of just listen to a podcast and be able to use, you know, use our hands. It's just part of who we are. So it's sort of when we can't do that, we go a bit mad. So
I think a lot of people will be able to identify that a lot more now after the last 3 months. Like it kept me sane in my garden and sort of just
gardening. That's the same thing, isn't it? It's that space where you just
hands
very connected
on and just potter around the garden and grow something. Yeah.
Yeah, we're thinking a lot about gardens at the moment, and sort of the history of gardens and how they are, you know, and class, and thinking about sort
Yeah.
of public space.
Yeah, I think it's. I talked to
Yeah.
the last artist about that, and actually, he was talking a lot about urban design, and that out of this, the kind of how urban
Yeah.
design will change, and the kind of, it is so, like, you have a garden, and it's so important, but that's very related to class and you know, sort of
Yeah,
as well.
and sort of public gardens that are a very particular type of gardening, and not necessarily where things are grown, or, you know, to eat, or with, and thinking about children as well, and sort of bringing that knowledge into their awareness in schools, and sort of,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot you can think about in that, and
I think a lot of I read something the other day about the curriculum and how schools could be doing so much more in terms of outside, particularly at the moment, because of, you know, one of the things is to, you know, the slightly reduce the risk is like be outside, you know, sort of, and our local school is set in the most amazing outdoor space, surrounded by an amazing park, and the children are not out in it, and
they're not out in it. Yeah, I think it
really does.
needs to change. Yeah, and forest schools would be more on people's mind, I think, in that outdoor learning, and that's such a rich way of such a rich, you know, there's so much to learn for children in that context, and we're sort of thinking about how our work can fit into that, and support those kind of spaces, and with sculpture as ways in, or not necessarily sculpture, but thinking about it as interactive, site specific places where we can support those kind of places, and make them inclusive for everyone, and not have it associated with class, and so there's lots of seedlings of ideas, and you know, and just being outside more, and just kind of exploring new, like, there's so many amazing holloways here in Dorset that are, you know, ancient pathways that a lot of people don't know even exist, so we're kind of exploring where we are, and seeing how we can incorporate all those things into where we go next.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Good to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye.